Hello and welcome to this Wednesday's morning market briefing. We've got lots to talk about, but firstly, Nvidia shares closed down 7% as tech sell-off reignites, as well as that Israel says it has killed now a senior Hezbollah commander in Beirut strike. We've got lots to talk about on the charts, also with lots happening on the economic calendar, but we'll come to that near the end, so make sure you stay around so you can see that. Before we get straight into it though, make sure to subscribe. The first article to talk about is to do with tech stocks and Nvidia. Now, the stock price of Nvidia closed down 7% down ending of Tuesday's market session following a massive sell-off in chip-making stocks. This came as many traders and investors watched closely for earnings reports from the largest tech companies of the US this week. So ultimately, that's now why we're seeing Nvidia sell off, it seems like. But ultimately, this is something that we were kind of talking about even last week when we started to first see those earnings reports coming out, and we started to see the kind of effects within the markets as a result of those earnings reports. And two of those kind of key companies that, of course, we noted, I believe, were Tesla and Microsoft. I could be wrong, but ultimately I think those are the two companies that we were covering at the time. Could also possibly be Google. I think that was another one that we factored in. And with those companies, ultimately we were just seeing earnings reports come out and traders as a result sell off on those stocks because they just weren't coming in at those expected levels. They weren't hitting their profit targets or revenue targets even. And even if they were hitting those revenue targets, their costs were just exceeding levels ever seen before, really. Now, this article, this topic that we're going to cover today really does contextualize that. And ultimately, it's why Nvidia is now selling off massively, and why we've seen, Nvidia lose $750 billion worth of its, kind of market value, its market cap over the past 6 weeks. So ultimately, Nvidia has bared a large amount of the cost of the kind of AI hype, or at least has benefited off it initially, and now we're kind of seeing a sell-off take place as some of the kind of issues to do with the AI topic, the AI infrastructure start to highlight, and therefore we're seeing the effect in the markets as you would expect. Now, of course, it is important to note that whilst we have seen this sell-off in Nvidia's share price, at the same time Nvidia is still, has still performed quite incredibly over, year to date. And so ultimately this is more of a retracement, it's looking to be like, rather than, an absolute, market crash. So that's always a very important point to note. Now, going back to why, these earnings reports are not hitting the targets that we were expecting, well, ultimately, to explain that, we must first explain how all of these large tech giants have been investing massively into their AI infrastructure over the past year or so. And as a result, costs have been driven far higher. At the same time, this has benefited the likes of Nvidia and other chip making companies, of course, which benefit directly off this AI investment. But when these earnings reports have now come out, and the kind of AI infrastructure investment is now very clear, and how that's affecting the kind of profit margins for many of these tech firms, many are now starting to worry about the true costs of AI, and they're starting to worry about how profitable many of these tech companies will be going into the future, as kind of AI still requires a great deal of investment for it to kind of reach those key levels that it needs. And ultimately, with the amount of competition that we're seeing within the AI industry at the moment, one has to kind of expect even greater investment than we're already seeing, just to beat off many of those kind of new firms that are entering the space, where those be startups, or also be just those tech giants such as Google, such as Meta, such as even Tesla, that are just investing greatly into AI to kind of beat the competition. So everyone's trying to beat one another, and that's requiring a greater and greater amount of investment, which ultimately is affecting those profit margins which investors are looking at. And because now, revenue targets are not being met, but ultimately profit targets are not being met, many traders, many investors are starting to kind of, rein in their bets on, these key AI stocks, these key stocks which benefit off the AI revolution. And, the kind of key stock which has underpinned the entirety of the AI revolution thus far has, of course, been Nvidia, which has had a monumental rise over especially the past 2 years. where we've just seen a massive surge in its stock price, as many have kind of got in on the kind of bullish run that we have seen now take place. And what we're now seeing is the kind of sell-off from that bullish run, with Nvidia having now fallen more than 20% from its all-time high levels. This is a worrying image for Nvidia, considering the fact that Nvidia reached these all-time highs only a month ago, and these all-time highs briefly gave Nvidia the title of being the world's most valuable publicly traded company. The recent drop in Nvidia's share value means that they have lost over $750 billion in their market capitalization. Other chip stocks such as ARM have also seen a fall in their share price by 6%. A great number of these chip stocks saw great growth in their share price during the recent period of AI hype. This is also creating a larger sell-off. Despite that fact, both Nvidia and ARM are still more than double what their share value was the same time last year. This growth, when considering chip stocks, can be attributed to the recent wave of capital spending by massive tech giants such as Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta. The latest earnings reports for such tech giants, however, shows that such capital spending is running far ahead of returns and profits, and are ultimately just not hitting target levels. So, that's the kind of key news at the moment for these tech stocks, as of course we receive a great deal of earnings reports. We'll continue to cover this topic, of course, because there was a great deal of information that I could have put out here today regarding this topic, but I think the topic of Nvidia is always very interesting to cover, because it does represent the kind of AI revolution. And when we are talking about AI infrastructure investment, really all of this does come back to Nvidia. And it's a very interesting stock as well, as we just discussed. So that's why we focused in on Nvidia today, despite a great deal of news within the tech sector anyway. That's all to talk about on this article, though. Next article to talk about is to do with Israel and the topic, the kind of topic of world tensions and how that always affects markets as well, especially those key safe haven assets like gold, which will be coming to in the chart section just after this. So make sure you stay around so you can see that. Now, getting into the article, though, Israel has now reported that they've killed a senior Hezbollah commander during an airstrike on Beirut, Lebanon. The Hezbollah commander in question was reported by the IDF to have died in the southern area of Beirut, which is known to be a Hezbollah stronghold. Now, of course, we've been covering this topic since the October the 7th massacre and attack by Hamas, and since then, of course, we've seen Israel's operation into Gaza. We've also seen the Houthis, of course, fire a great deal of missiles towards Israel, but also attack a great deal of merchant vessels within the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. We've of course covered the fallout from that, especially the economic fallout from that, which is still something that we're seeing today. And of course we've also covered what's been happening in Lebanon with Hezbollah, which of course are kind of that paramilitary force, proxy force, sponsored by Iran, and really and this force really does control nearly the entirety of southern Lebanon, which does of course border onto Israel, and as a result we've been seeing a great deal of skirmishes and fighting on that border since that October the 7th attack. And the kind of key worry throughout this entire period has of course been the topic of a regional war. Many have worried that all these skirmishes, all these missile barrages would ultimately boil over into something like Iran versus Israel and all the proxy allies kind of getting involved, as well as we also know of course that Iran, their only enemy, their enemies in the Middle East are certainly not just Israel, and we know that other enemies in the region have of course been fighting some of Iran's proxy some of the members of their kind of proxy network, especially of course Saudi Arabia, which have been also fighting the Houthis for quite some time now within Yemen. So this topic has been of great importance to discuss, as ultimately it massively affects world tensions. World tensions are pushed higher when we're talking about this kind of topic of a regional war, and as a result those safe haven assets, as I referenced earlier, such as gold, are massively impacted by any new airstrike or any new topic of a peace deal or de-escalation. Anything like this massively affects markets, which is why we of course do cover it. Now the topic of Hezbollah specifically is of kind of most importance in the moment regarding the topic of a regional war, because really whilst the Houthis have been attacking Israel in some ways recently, really we just haven't seen the same intensity that we have seen from the likes of Hezbollah on the Lebanon border. The same can somewhat be said for Hamas in Gaza, of course, as well, where we really haven't seen much take place since, of course, the assault on Rafah by the IDF. So really not much is changing on these other fronts, whereas in Lebanon, of course, things are only really heating up. And this strike on the key Hezbollah commander in Beirut does, of course, bring bring new questions into the matter of, how will Hezbollah now respond to this, as this strike itself was in response to some suspected Hezbollah strikes into the Golan Heights not too long ago, which of course we covered it in yesterday's or the day before's morning market briefing. So that's why this topic is of such importance, and that is what is currently going on, it does seem like, with the IDF describing the commander as the most senior commander and the right-hand man to the leader of Hezbollah. We are still yet to receive an official statement from Hezbollah regarding the strike. This latest airstrike by Israel has struck new fears into officials around the world, and especially those concerned with the Middle East, as many now worry that this latest attack could further intensify the current clashes which are taking place between Israel and its adversaries, and many are now most concerned with the prospect that this could all boil over into a regional war. As a result, a great deal of effort is now being put into de-escalating the situation by the US officials in the area. So that's the kind of key topic at the moment regarding world tensions, regarding Israel and that kind of thing. So make sure you keep your eye on this topic, as we're really waiting to hear from that, the Hezbollah, kind of the institution of Hezbollah. We're waiting to kind of hear from them what their kind of response to this situation might be, and of course that response will have a massive impact on markets as well. So definitely keep your eyes on this topic. But that's all we need to cover really on the articles there. Next, talk about, like always, is the charts, where some interesting things are playing out for sure. But like always, we are starting on the Dow Jones, the US 30, where sadly not too much is taking place. As you can see here, price is really just ranging around, consolidating even, to start off the week. As we did cover it in yesterday's morning market briefing, the price retraced on the retracement. So what we had kind of seen on the retracement of the retracement. So ultimately, of course, we saw the massive bullish push to the upside following the 9th of June. We just saw this continuation to the upside all the way up until the 18th of July. From that point, we saw a significant sell-off to the downside, where then price reacted to that 61.80 that we had marked out. So it didn't reach the 78.60, which seemed to be a far more relevant level or significant level which price would interact with. So then price started to move again to the upside. But as it was on that move to the upside, price then reacted to the key psychological level of 40,800, where price is now sold off once again. And that was the kind of retracement that we were talking about in yesterday's morning market briefing. But from that point, we haven't seen price continue that move lower, and instead we've actually just seen price bottom out, near and around the key area of liquidity at the 40,500 level, or near and around the 40,500 level. And now we're seemingly forming this kind of period of consolidation, this ranging motion where price is forming double tops and really not moving anywhere. So that's seemingly what the Dow Jones is currently facing, and of course we'll keep you updated on this topic should any moves take place. Next to talk about though is the dollar, which is very important to kind of talk about today. Actually, going back to the Dow Jones just for a second there, because a point kind of came into my head there, is ultimately, whilst we are seeing this kind of sideways price action, this is really not uncommon when we're receiving such important economic data or economic news that week. For example, today we're receiving the Fed's interest rate decision and their press conference, which will obviously follow after. And of course, on Friday this week, we're receiving the US NFP figure. So ultimately, we're receiving some of the most important economic news points this week for the US, which directly relate to the US economy and therefore US stocks, and especially the dollar as well. So that's why we could definitely see some movement come into the market following today, following the economic news points that we're about to receive. Next to talk about though is the dollar, as I previously mentioned, which did start off the week by breaking above this key liquidity zone and resistance level, which had formed the kind of top of this period of consolidation. So price did break above that level, But over the course of yesterday, it did seem like price just could not stay above and in those kind of key levels, and ultimately just ended up selling off and breaking back below the key liquidity zone and key resistance level between the levels of 104.57 and of course 104.5. So that's seemingly what's now playing out for the dollar. It'll be interesting to see whether now, because the dollar's returned within this range, whether price will now remain within this range for a serious period of time, or in fact will price return back above this key liquidity zone and start making some interesting moves. Next to talk about though is Euro USD. Which has now kind of bottomed out at this key lower level of liquidity, really sitting, which kind of almost perfectly tapping and then moving away from the key psychological level of 1.08, which has definitely formed this key liquidity zone that we had marked out for quite some time now, and seemingly price has now reacted to it once again and has moved away in a very bullish fashion from that level. It'll be interesting to see now whether we'll see a large move to the upside from that key liquidity zone, or in fact we now to kind of remain within this range that's seemingly formed over well, not as seemingly formed, but ultimately could form as a result of these two key liquidity zones. So definitely keep your eyes on Euro USD, very important indeed to look at. Next to talk about though is pound yen, which has continued this sell-off to the downside that pound yen has just experienced over the past week or so, as ultimately ending off last week we saw price kind of stall out, we saw price kind of bottom out, or at least that's what we thought had happened, as price had kind of found the bottom of the market around the very key psychological level of 196. So price bounced off that level and moved to the upside, where it then formed a kind of a higher level, or a kind of top in the market, really around the 198.8 level, and even higher than that, possibly around the 199.45 level. So those were the kind of levels which price was remaining within, and no moves were kind of really being made, as price was just remaining within this range that had kind of formed, this period that had formed. Ultimately though, over the course of yesterday, price reacted once again to this key area of liquidity that we had noted out, which is around the 198.6 level, and ultimately from that level price has now sold off once again to the downside and broken below the bottom of the market that was formed around the 25th of July. So that's currently what is happening for pound yen. Now the kind of key question to ask is whether we'll continue to see a great deal of bearish momentum within the market, whether we'll continue to see a sell-off take place, and we'll just have to wait and see. So definitely keep your eyes on pound yen. Next to talk about is Bitcoin, which ultimately has kind of dipped below that 6180, but is still somewhat remaining above that kind of key Fibonacci retracement level. So it'll be interesting to see whether price does seriously react to this level and move to the upside to possibly reach those higher areas of liquidity and key Fibonacci extension levels. That's all to talk about on Bitcoin. Next about is gold, which has made some very interesting moves, seemingly as a result of the kind of key topics regarding the Israeli airstrike, which of course we just covered, which links back to why that topic is so important to cover, of course. So whilst we are receiving the Fed's interest rate decision today, and also the Bank of Japan's interest rate decision, and a great deal of Eurozone data, which would lead you to suspect kind of a stagnating market, especially for gold, as price would move sideways waiting for the news. Ultimately, seemingly because of that Israeli airstrike, because of the heightened world tensions and the fears of a regional war, gold's price has moved to the upside and broken above this key liquidity zone and key psychological level of 2,400. So it'll be interesting to see whether price now reacts to that 78.60 as we lead up into, or as we receive some very important economic data today. That's all to talk about on gold. Next to talk about is oil, which is broke even further to the downside despite the risks of a regional war within the Middle East, and the from the news that we've received yesterday regarding the Israeli airstrike. So price has further broken to the downside, broken below the very key psychological level of $80 a barrel, which of course was most recently broken back in the 3rd of July, where price broke below that level but soon returned back above. So possibly that's what we're about to see again with the heightened fears within the Middle East. That's all to talk about on oil though, and that's all to talk about on the charts. Lastly, to talk about, of course, is the economic calendar, where, as I kind of reference or as I link to throughout the morning market briefing, we are receiving a great deal of very important economic data points today, so I'll try and get through it as quick as possible. Firstly, receiving the Aussie inflation rate figure, as well as the Japanese industrial production and retail sales figure, followed by that receiving the Chinese manufacturing figure, as well as the Bank of Japan's interest rate decision. Followed by that though, we're receiving the Japanese consumer confidence figure and the German retail sales figure, followed by that receiving the French inflation rate figure and the German unemployment rate figure, and to end off that, we're receiving the Eurozone's and Italian inflation rate figures. So some very important Eurozone data there, which will massively affect things like the euro and even gold. Next to talk about though is the US mortgage data that we will be receiving, and ending off that, we'll receive the Canadian GDP figure. But ultimately, to end off the day, and most importantly, we are receiving the Fed's interest rate decision and their press conference. So make sure to listen out for that. Make sure to watch out for that, as that will really be the thing affecting markets today. That's all to talk about on the economic calendar though. We've got lots in the articles, lots in the charts, and lots in the economic calendar. Hope you have a great trading day, but that's all from us at Wildwood Capital. Have a great one. See you later. Bye.